The intention of this podcast series is to firstly showcase the findings of key research areas conducted on behalf of the PSETA, and secondly, to reflect and engage with some of the key issues facing the public service sector in terms of issues around skills, capabilities, competence, and capacity. So, in this podcast series, the researchers from each project will share their research focus, their findings, and their recommendations. And in view of this focus, we want to focus on areas such as unpacking the notion of a performing state, what skills can and can't do for a capable state, skills planning in the public service sector, and what is needed to facilitate the building of a capable state. Today I'm joined by two of our colleagues, Clercq and Mlauzi and Professor Francine De Clercq, who are going to take us through the project that they were doing within the PSETA podcast series. Welcome, colleagues, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hello.
Hi.
Now, to begin, can you please tell us what was your research project about?
So we were looking at competency frameworks. So the overall project is reviewing professional competency frameworks in the public sector. And in doing so, we try to sort of understand what are competency frameworks by looking at international literature, by looking at local literature, within the public space, by interrogating how competencies are used, how are they adopted by different departments. And what we found out from the literature is that competency frameworks have different uses. It depends on how they are adopted by different departments. That will determine how they use it. But overall, these frameworks are intended to set standards for performance so that individuals are assessed. They are also used as a tool for recruitment, selection, developing and managing the performance of human capital. In uncovering that, we also try to understand, are they being used as they should be, as they are set out to be used? And we were sort of also interrogating that.
Thank you so much. Now, what would you say was the central problem or concern that your research project was trying to address?
So what we were looking at is we sort of had three questions. Are competency frameworks appropriate? Are they empowering HR tools? Are they aligned with the public sector's organizational performance? And are competency frameworks symptoms of deeper causes of poor performance in the public sector? And thirdly, can competency frameworks be improved? How and under what conditions can be improved? We looked at 4 competency frameworks within the public sector, which is the senior management competency framework, middle management competency framework. We also looked at the monitoring and evaluation competency frameworks and financial management competency frameworks. We sort of interrogated how competency is adopted within the frameworks, and the middle management and senior management competency frameworks are mostly based on core or generic competencies. The financial management one and the M&E is mostly on more technical occupational competencies. The M&E one is mostly also involves generic competencies and technical competencies. So these are competencies that should be used in the public sector by all departments. But what we found out from the research is that what is actually being used the most is the SMS and the MMS competency frameworks. And with National Treasury, they use the financial management competency framework.
So what would you say these findings mean for the public service sector or for the PSETA for that matter? And how would you say this adds to our body of knowledge as to what is needed in terms of building a capable state?
Maybe if I can go one step backwards in terms of understanding our approach to the findings. We believe that competency is a more individualistic notion. So what we had in mind was to say, well, how can individual competencies really improve the performance of the whole public service? So our approach was that individual competency lies within a bigger whole, which is organizational competencies and state competencies. So our framework was to say that individual competencies are influenced and determined by the organization they're in and by the state institution they're in. But that doesn't mean that individuals cannot act sometime with some discretion and autonomy, and therefore that they could, despite the, let's say, negative environment, they could still do something. And we did notice that in some sectors and some departments and not others. So that was the approach, to try to understand how competencies framework were implemented in these 4 areas. The findings, I think, is important, precisely coming out of the conceptual framework, is to say that competency can do more, and competency framework can do more when you have a very proactive sector or department. And indeed, the National Treasury is one example where competencies seem to be captured more proactively by the National Treasury to improve the HR, the human relation chain, whereas many others were using competency framework as a ticking box and basically as a bureaucratic compliance exercise, which they did not own, which they did not believe was going to do anything, and was mainly not used for recruitment, but at the most for training and performance management, even if performance management is known in the public service not to lead to consequence management. So in that sense, I think what the competency framework aimed to do was not realized in many of the departments. And to follow up your question about what does it mean for the PSETAs, is to understand that before expecting too much of the individual competencies and the competency framework, one need to look at the organization that they're in and the state institution and make those enabling for the competencies and the competency framework to work and indeed add an HR value to the recruitment, the training, the performance management, etc. So that's our main findings, I think.
Thank you so much. Now, could you please explain, linking or building from the findings, what recommendations then emerged to address the problem that you researched? And if I may go further, what do these recommendations mean in terms of how we then locate the issue of skills within the public service sector?
I mean, we did make a few recommendations. And the one thing that and it relates to what my colleague Kate just mentioned, is that too often the competency frameworks are only talking generic core competencies. And that is not enough. We need to actually go beyond and look at the technical, professional competencies that are needed. So that if the public sector and the PSETAs wanted to add something to the competency framework as they are now, they must make sure that there is a professional dimension as well as a generic dimension. And we know that they're thinking about it, but it hasn't been done. And it's not an accident that the financial management competency framework did actually add more value, because they do indeed include quite a lot of technical professional competencies. In terms of recommendation, we do believe also, like, without repeating myself too much, that an enabling environment is key, and that you can't just expect the competency framework to turn around the performance of the public service if the enabling environment doesn't exist. And by enabling environment, we need many things. I mean, we mean leadership. There should be leadership there that is capable of using the competency framework in a way that they're meant to be. We need a culture of work that is also helping. In other words, we need to allow individuals to use the autonomy and the space they have to perform better. And at the moment, we have many departments that are so controlling and perpetuating a culture of compliance that the competency framework doesn't kind of match with that. So that would be another one. A third recommendation was that too often the competency framework are limited at the organizational that you are part of and are not looking at what is really happening in many instances, which is that departments work with each other. And so we're talking about a competency framework that include not just intra-organizational arrangement, but also inter-organizational framework and go beyond their silos in that sense. So we're talking for greater collaboration, network, and partnership between the various public service department that would allow them to operate more successfully. So we believe that with this supportive leadership, enabling culture, that the individual will find the space and the autonomy that they can use in order to make the competency framework add values, and that we need to really shift this culture of compliance, bureaucratic compliance, towards an enabling compliance. Not compliance, but enabling environment, rather, that will allow professional individual agency to be exercised. In relation to the skills, and your last question was about that, it's difficult to know at the moment because we do believe that the skills and the knowledge in the competency framework are not properly explained. So when it's generic and you have something like project management, change management, you want to know, but what is behind that? What makes a person skilled at change management? So we do believe that if you indeed have a parallel definition of competencies that relate to the sector, that this could be better and easier for the people who recruit, the people who train, the people who do the performance management to really enhance the skills. So we can see that the competency framework in an ideal environment can add value to indeed improve and upskill the people in it. But we need to not just change the environment, but change the way the competencies are framed and put in the framework. So in short, we're aware that skills are definitely something that need to be enhanced, but we're not quite sure that the competency framework today can really enhance those skills at the moment. Except the interesting thing is that the National Treasury, and looking at the financial management framework, we do see how they specify so well the kind of skills of auditing, of financial management, etc., that you can touch in the competency, you can understand them. And also the interesting thing is that those occupations have professional association attached to them. And the financial management framework was constructed partly in collaboration with those professional associations. So that also added value and texture to the skills of financial management and financial auditing. So there's hope in that sense. And our final recommendation is that we try more with a department like National Treasury, because National Treasury could actually show us a way forward that could then be adapted for other departments. But they seem to be more equipped at the moment to realize the best of competency framework.
So just to add on what Francine was saying, so when we were going through the literature, what we realized is that there's a debate about whether competencies should be more generic or more technical or professional. So when competencies are core or generic, it's difficult to assess them, which is difficult for you to link them to a particular body of knowledge, like especially for leaders and managers. Then you assume what their role should be, and it's not linked to a specific sector like Francine was saying. So to ground it on a specific body of knowledge would be very important, when these competency frameworks are developed.
Thank you so much. My key takeaway is that unless we locate skills within specific bodies of knowledge, then they might not do much within competency frameworks to improve the public service sector and ultimately to lead to a more capable state. Colleagues, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for such insightful research. And we look forward to learning more on competency frameworks as well.
Thank you, Themba.
Thank you.